Let's take a look at sketching different summer flowers, and what I have in mind is a full page of field flowers that I found on my adventures outside and that I brought home to sketch together with you. So I'm starting with this red poppy here, and I've sped up things a little bit so that you don't have to sit through all of my drawing activities. So you can see I'm just very roughly sketching the plants here. And this is chamomile. And the last thing on this page is a red clover, a particularly large and beautiful specimen. So again, I'm adding a few of the leaves, of the smaller leaves too. And if you don't want to draw these elements with an overlap, then you can always draw the stem a little bit longer and then get a clear view on a leaf or on a petal or on a cusp. And now we can go into the detail, into the color application for the poppy. So in this sketchbook and in this class, you will notice that I use a lot of colored pencil for the first layers and sometimes for the last layers. And this is not because I don't like watercolor anymore, but because the paper in this sketchbook is not very well suited for lots and lots of layers of watercolor. So I figured since it takes colored pencils very well, I will simply use those for most of the layers of color application here. So it's a bit of a different technique. I happen to have a lot of different colors of colored pencils. Some are water soluble, like this one, and some are not. They have this sort of waxy residue, and this can make it sometimes a bit hard to paint over it with watercolor, but usually it works. And so you don't need all of these different kinds of colored pencils. Usually a small selection will work well. And yeah, they particularly work well on this sort of hot pressed paper that I'm using here. And basically you would use them in the same way as you would watercolors. So you build up layers. And here you can see I'm adding a little bit of paint of watercolor to the larger areas. I'm trying this out, but I ended up not being that content with the watercoloring part on this paper. So I went back to more colored pencils later. And essentially the two techniques work in the same way in that you build up layers and intensify your colors that way. You can see I'm dropping a little bit of paint into the areas where I want my red to be darker. Then you can also see that this paper creates these little loose bits of fiber, or I don't know what, that doesn't really look that great when you paint on it with watercolor. And a little bit of it disappeared when the paint dried, but I didn't really like to paint with water-based media on this paper. So the red poppy has this sort of has these dark stripes, these dark sort of landing strips, which you could call them. And I assume this is for the insects to center in on the part of the flower that's interesting for them. I have no idea if this is right, but it would make a lot of sense to me. So my watercolor layer has dried, and I'm going over it again with the colored pencil that I have here, which incidentally is called Poppy Red. So there are different brands, of course, of colored pencils, and I don't have an absolute favorite. I tend to use those by Faber-Castell because I can get them most easily here. Then I have some by Caran d'Ache, Supracolor, I believe they are called. And I also, the Poppy Red that you just saw is a Derwent Inktense, I believe. And so there are different brands, they all behave a little bit differently, but essentially the same. And some of them, as I said, are water soluble and some are not. So onto the chamomile, and for smaller areas on the paper, for these delicate parts of the flower, I decided that watercolor would work just fine. And so I'm adding with lemon yellow, I'm adding these yellow parts of the chamomile. Really characteristic and really nice to look at. Dropping in a bit more paint to intensify the color, and dropping in a little bit of light green, and now adding with a colored pencil the stems and the leaves of the plant. And I always find it's a bit easier to draw these really delicate parts of a flower with the tip of a colored pencil rather than with a brush. But you can of course use what you like and what you prefer. Darkening a few areas with a darker colored pencil, just to show that there's a three-dimensionality. And now for drawing these white parts of the flower. So one technique you can do is do it like this with a light gray or a light blue, and then just reinforce some of the pencil lines with the darker color to show that there's just a little bit of shadow, a little bit of contrast. And another technique would be to paint another color, a darker color, outside of the flower heads. And for the last one, the red clover, I'm starting with a very light wash of quinacridone pink, which is my go-to standard pink magenta tone. It's a very good mixer, and it's a nice color on its own too. So for these sort of pink flowers or rose-colored flowers, it works very well. And then I'm adding just a light touch of this warm light green. This is May green. So this very first layer of everything is always more like a color reference for me, and making sure I apply the color in the places that it needs to go. I always keep looking back between my reference and my drawing. And so this is to establish the colors, the light and dark areas, and only later you can intensify what you've done in your basic first layer. And that's basically what I'm doing here. I'm using a slightly darker mix of this quinacridone pink with just a bit of my dark red. So this is alizarin crimson or madder red. And I'm going over all of these single petals again. And colored pencils or a really fine-tipped brush will give you these really precise lines and nice thin lines for exact results. So I find that colored pencils work particularly well on this. And now for even more details on the flower, I'm bringing out this darker colored pencil, this darker violet. And on the other side, where there's a little bit of a different light going on, I'm using this pink colored pencil. So this also always worth a thought. What is the light situation? Even in a very even light at your desk, you can bring out the three-dimensionality of an object, such as this round flower head, in different ways by adding a shadowy side and then a lighter side. And with all of that in place, the sketches are finished, and I want to add a title and the names of the plants so that I can remember what they are. So I'm using my fountain pen here, as I often do, adding the German and the English name with the fountain pen. And then I also have a dip pen with a differently colored ink. So this brown would be similar to yellow ochre or raw sienna. And I'm measuring again the areas where I want the text to be, so that everything is sort of balanced and nice looking. So I find it can really look nice if you take different colors for different aspects of your text. And that's the whole page of field flowers in summer. If you found this video useful and want to see a longer version of it, it's part of a longer video class called Drawing Ideas for Summer. In this video course, we will explore sketching nature in summer, and I will share lots of different ideas for drawing and how you can explore sketching outside in the warm season. We will go for a hike together and take a look at different field sketching techniques, and I'll share step-by-step demonstrations with you. We will explore drawing tree shapes and tree portraits, insects, painting small landscapes, sketching birds, and creating watercolor maps. This class is perfect for anyone who wants to get started or continue with nature sketching, and anyone who wants to keep exploring and learning more about nature in a creative way. Your skill level doesn't matter as long as you have curiosity and an interest in nature, so this class is great for sketchbook beginners. The whole course has over 2 hours of video, so I hope you will join me for this class to explore sketching nature in summer.